You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Wednesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to my show. This is the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can come over and join the simulcast in video over on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, the video is pretty much just my face talking with my gorgeous backdrop in the background. And sometimes we'll show some graphics and some cool pictures in relation to the show. Most of the time, it's just me. But the beautiful upside of the YouTube channel is that you get to see the chat room and join the live chat room going on there of other Intrepheads. So come on over, join the family, join the conversation while we're going, and have a good time tonight. Now, I've been away for a few days. That's why we had some rebroadcasts playing Monday and Tuesday. And those of you who listen and catch the Sunday morning show over on my YouTube channel, that's why I was gone. I've been gone since Friday. Just returned late last night, Tuesday night, and now we're back in the saddle with a new show. And so we're going to pick up our series where we left off last week. But first, I want to get into some things that are really important issues, I think. And it's issues that are troublesome to me. Yes, they revolve a bit around politics, but don't look at it as politics. Look at it as current events that are taking place in your country. And I want to talk about some things. And something that really struck me over the weekend was I had seen several people send me links to this group of doctors that were supposed to be out front, face front doctors that are out there that are contradicting some of the narrative about coronavirus, about wearing masks, about treatment, etc., etc., etc. And so I wanted to look at this video and share this video with some people. And of course, all I'm getting is negative responses from the leftist people that like to come in, and some of them are good friends, so I can't just label them that way. But friends of mine who are also leftists who want to downgrade any message that is outside the narrative of the left. And there's something I want you as my listeners to be very clear on. Everything you are seeing pandemic-wise, let me back that up. The pandemic is real. Coronavirus is real. Coronavirus has taken lives. We know that. We also know that the numbers are padded. There are lives that have been lost that are listed as coronavirus that wasn't the main cause, or the coronavirus was something that actually ended somebody's life when they were sick with something else and their entire immune system was compromised. So that's in a nutshell without me being a doctor. You look at enough information out there and you get that. You get the issue of face masks. Now, they're not mandated here in Wisconsin, and we drove over into Minnesota, and everywhere we went, we had to have a mask on. I was twice at the hotel where we were staying. I was upbraided by hotel management. And there was a point where I said, look, I wear a mask a lot. I said, I'm not wearing a mask right now to walk down to the lobby and get a cup of coffee, because I'm going to be drinking that coffee. And I was being talked to as if she was like a school teacher and I was some young prepubescent school child who needed chiding. And I said, let me remind you of something. I said, the mandatory mask is not a legal issue. I cannot be arrested for this. I cannot have a ticket written against me. I said, I'm not wearing a mask right now. Number one, because I'm drinking coffee. Number two, I said, because I have a bronchial infection right now, and I have a form of asthma that I've had for years. This is why you hear me cough a lot. And I said, look, when I wear a mask, it exacerbates that. I said, so when I'm in a setting where I'm drinking coffee, I generally won't wear my mask. And I said to this woman, I said, look, I'm your customer. I said, if you talk to me one more time and chide me for something that is not the hotel's responsibility to make sure I wear a mask, and you talk to me that way, I said, you'll probably lose my business. So that overall, there's one aspect of that. And that's a whole nother conversation. There's a whole lot more detail there. And there would be a back and forth on that, I'm sure, from a lot of people out there. I'm not an anti-masker, but I am also not a pro-masker. I'm wear a mask if you believe that it's working for you, wear it. If you go out into a large crowd, if you go into public places, wear it. Go ahead and do that. I think that's important. But I do not think it needs to be handled the way it's being handled. I believe the mask issue is a politicized issue. And this is what I want to talk about this morning. Not just on the masks, on everything. We are about 90 days out, 93, 94 days out from the presidential election. Now, I don't care where you stand. I don't care if you are pro-President Trump, anti-President Trump, pro-Biden, anti-Joe Biden. It doesn't matter to me. What I want to get at the crux is this. You've had the left for 4 years. They screamed about Donald Trump being the election being swayed by Russia and the Russia collusion and all that. That would turn out to be an absolutely false narrative. All it did was suck up our time. It sucked up our efforts. When the Congress should have been working on other things, including pandemic, they were worried about an impeachment of Donald Trump over a phone call. They were looking for any way possible they could to remove him from office. And mind you, if you don't know this already, I said it on this show, the impeachment that we saw taking place was the ninth effort that they had put forward since the beginning of Trump's presidency. The first effort was 2 days after he was sworn into office. That gives you an idea of what's going on there. Now, move all that aside. I want to talk about this idea of the left and the huge, major conglomerate corporations that run social media. Google, which owns YouTube, which Facebook, all of these have a hand in wanting to sway the election to get the sitting president out of office. Now, this is where I say I don't care if you like or hate Trump. Do you believe that is a good thing for these corporations to do? Where most people get their information from social media, and social media is blocking out any kind of information, censoring any kind of information that they, as the self-appointed adjudicators of information, the self-appointed avatars of information, have disallowed people from seeing. If that is not swaying an election, I don't know what is. So what you've got is, I'm going to refer to an article, and I saw this on, that evil Breitbart. It's evil because it's conservative, and it's not controlled by these entities. But the only control Breitbart has over it is that you get a lot of blockage from Google, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube and those places. And they had this to say, and I'm pulling some information from this because this is the best place to get it, the easiest place to get it for sake of this conversation. A few days after the 2016 election, at an internal meeting later leaked to Breitbart News, top Google executives, including Sundar, I don't pronounce all these names, Sundar Pichai, Sergey Brin, Kent Walker, they all lamented Trump's victory, comparing Trump's voters to extremists and discussing their desire to make Trump's election and the populist movement a blip in history. Now, Google's been purging Breitbart's content from search results since the 2016 election. And there's been a whole hell of a lot of hullabaloo about this over the recent year about conservative news being blocked. And I'm only bringing this up because, do you want to hear only news that demeans, demonizes, and degrades the president? Or do you want to make up your own mind by hearing both sides of the story? Well, a lot of the social media that's out there doesn't allow you to hear both sides of the story. And people who put up any content, I've experienced this, that goes against the narrative that they want people to have, gets summarily censored or blocked. Now, it hasn't happened on my YouTube channel yet. Hopefully this broadcast won't prompt them to start looking deeper. But search visibility on the internet is a key industry measure of how findable a publisher's content is in Google search. Now, new data shows that Google has suppressed Breitbart's search visibility by 99.7% since 2016 because they deem Breitbart extreme rightist, when all they are is a conservative version of the news, rather than your typical leftist version of the news. This sounds like an old argument. We heard this when Reagan was president. My God, 40 years ago. We heard this 35 years ago, that the news media is mostly left slanted. And if you have not seen that yourself, I don't care if you are right or left of center. If you can't see that, you are not looking. There are other places to get your information, granted, but let's talk about the mainstream media. Let's focus on that with this. On April 4th of 2016, Breitbart ranked in the top 10 search positions. That means on the first page of Google search results for 355 key search terms. But now, as of July of 2020, Breitbart ranks in the top 10 search positions for only one search item. And that's down 354 items. And on April 4th of 2016, Breitbart ranked in the top 100 search positions for 16,820 key search terms. But now, as of July 20th of 2020, just a week ago, Breitbart ranks in the top 10 search positions for only 55 search terms instead of 16,820. Moreover, organic Google search traffic to Breitbart, measured by unique visitors, is down 63% when comparing the first half of 2016 with the first half of 2020. Now, by the way, the reason I looked all this up and the reason I'm on Breitbart, because I did a Google search for news from Breitbart on is the pandemic being, my search term was, is the pandemic being used to sway the 2020 election? Not, is it fake? Is it being used politically? That's the question I asked. And I couldn't find anything from any conservative news outlet. All I found were articles stating that it wasn't. And what a laugh that was. So I had to go into independent, I had to go to websites to find this information. Breitbart has a ton of articles on it. Did they show up in the top 10, the first 5 pages of Google searches? No, not at all. Moreover, this search traffic to Breitbart, measured by unique visitors, is down 63% in the last 4 years. Now, following, and that's not people looking for Breitbart, that's Breitbart coming up as a news organization in the top 10 listings. Now, the following chart, and there's a chart here, shows the visibility of Breitbart, and it's dropped significantly since 2016. And it's spiked to the bottom by mid 2017. And Google has nearly eliminated Breitbart content from its search results. Why would they do that? Does that bother you at all? That when people want to be informed and they want to look at both sides of an issue, conservative or liberal, rightist or leftist, that they can't get that on a normal Google search? I mean, Google is so popular, it's become, you Google something. That's been around for years. But so everybody goes to Google to look for things. But they're almost eliminated from Google searches. Breitbart, Fox News, Ben Shapiro, different conservative people. They do not show up if you put in a straight question that's not slanted in any direction, you're only going to get the leftist. On Facebook, if you post something that the left does not agree with, which the hierarchy at Facebook does not agree with politically, it's eliminated. It's censored. Why not let people decide for themselves? You ask me, who are really the fascists when they want to eliminate the free expression of information? Oh, well, we just want to make sure that the proper information is dispensed. Since when? Do they do that for everything? No, they're doing it for things that will affect your government, that things will affect the election. Now, we can go into all the graphs. I didn't take pictures of them, so I'm not putting them up. But on May 1st, Google searches for Joe Biden generated approximately 30,000 impressions or views used as a metric for advertisers. After May 5th, both impressions and clicks went to zero. Breitbart News spoke to an SEO, a search engine optimization expert, a 25-year industry veteran whose job consists of analyzing traffic data from Google's own website, performance portal, the Google Search Console. The expert, who wished to remain anonymous, said he'd never seen anything like this graph, and that it indicates highly probable manipulation on the part of Google. I've never experienced such a wholesale removal of rank and visibility on specific concepts on a site as I've seen being applied to Breitbart News, said the expert. Removal is the key, not dropping in rank, which would be an organic devaluing. These ranks are simply gone overnight, while other topics have been untouched. And so the sheer fact that there are thousands of pages of Breitbart content that reference Biden that were ranking before May 6th that now have no rank or impressions on search is a sign of manipulation, not algorithmic devaluing. So what has Google done? Google has ensured that any negative speak about Joe Biden is eliminated. So nobody gets to see that. So all you hear are all the wonderful gushy stories of Joe Biden, because they don't necessarily support Joe Biden. They support Trump not returning to office. And they're going to do whatever they can to make that happen. The percentage of traffic to, and I'm using Breitbart just as an example through this whole thing, the percentage of traffic to Breitbart from Google search, 9%, is just a fraction of the average publisher's 30 to 50%. Experts believe Breitbart is being blacklisted by Google. Dr. Robert Epstein, unfortunate last name these days, he's a psychologist and a former Hillary Clinton supporter who spent the last half of a decade studying the effects of search engine bias on voters, said he believes Breitbart News is currently on one of Google's blacklists, a topic on which he's written extensively. Look him up, by the way, Dr. Robert Epstein, on Google's blacklists. He says, for news websites large and small, Google, in combination with its YouTube offshoot, typically drives between 30 and 50% of traffic to those sites, Dr. Epstein told Breitbart News via email. For the New York Times, the percentage is currently 39.3% at the moment. Google is responsible for just 9% of Breitbart's traffic, and YouTube is sending a negligible amount, if any, toward Breitbart. Given the size of Breitbart's audience, this suggests to me that Breitbart is listed on one or more of Google's blacklists. Now, those are the lists that Google denies having, even under oath in congressional hearings, even though 2 of those blacklists were linked from the company last year by whistleblower Zach Voorhees. So how many blacklists they actually maintain is unknown, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's 100 or more, continued Epstein. Now, Epstein recently told Breitbart News' Alex Marlow that Google is likely to shift 10% of voters away from Trump to fulfill its executive's stated goal of avoiding a repeat of 2016. The psychologist has previously explained how Google's search bias can affect undecided voters by offering them selective information about political candidates. This is because voters aren't inclined to suspect search results of bias in the same way they might suspect a CNN or a New York Times or a Breitbart News or a Fox News to be biased. They don't expect that Google search is going to be biased, but Google has a bias. In testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee last year, Epstein warned lawmakers that big tech could influence an extraordinary number of voters without any trace at all. In 2020, if all these big tech companies are supporting the same candidate, there are 15 million votes on the line that could be shifted without people's knowledge and without leaving a paper trail for authorities to trace. So in a comment to Breitbart News, a Google spokeswoman denied allegations of political bias. There's no validity whatsoever to these allegations of political bias, said the woman. Our systems do not take political ideology into account, and we go to extraordinary lengths to build our products for everyone in an apolitical way. Anyone can easily cherry-pick a range of conservative, progressive, or non-political sites that have seen traffic changes over time. The improvements we make to search undergo a rigorous testing process and are done to provide helpful information for the billions of queries we get every day. Yet Google search rankings suggest more wholesale suppression of conservative publishers. Breitbart News isn't the only conservative news site that has an unusually low position on Google's search rankings. Now, by the way, search rankings are generated by data that you ask about. Tell me about the 2016 election. You don't get conservative news. You only get leftist news. And they've got a chart here that shows Forbes at the top, Business Insider, Vox, Heavy, The Atlantic, USA Today, Times, CBS News, The Guardian, so on all the way down the list. And before you get to anybody that's conservative at all, you're 30 news sites into this list before you even hit something like Fox News, which has only 2% versus 0.2 versus 0.8. So percentages of website traffic from Google show these rankings. 8 of the 10 lowest ranked sites, Breitbart News, Fox, Daily Caller, Blaze, Reason, The Federalist, The Daily Wire, The Washington Examiner, are at the bottom of search criteria, of search data. So Google has stated its intention clearly to make sure that the 2016 election of President Trump was a blip in history. Sure enough, with less than 5 months before the election, now less than 4 months since this article was written, Google is manipulating election-related search results. And the scope and the audacity, the hubris, make any alleged foreign interference in the 2016 election pale
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. We have returned for the second segment of the Intrepid radio program tonight. You can find us on Odyssey Radio Network, that's ODYSY1.com, or you can come on over to my YouTube channel, watch the video simulcast, and join the live chat room going on right now as we're talking during this show. Come on over, join the other Intrepids, and let's get at it. Now, I've been talking for a month about Native American history, their version of the suppression of Native American tribes, the oppression of them, the obliteration of them, and the conquering of the American West under the United States manifest destiny, manifest by God, to be destined to own this continent from sea to shining sea, and eminent domain and other things. We've seen treaties written, treaties broken. We've seen atrocities committed. And now we've been talking it just as a reminder. We left off the other day, we were talking about Cochise, the rise of Cochise, his father-in-law, Mangus, who we just got through the murder of Mangus. And the Mexicans had approached Mangus's camp, told him the soldiers were coming, and Mangus went out all on his own to say they aren't going to kill an old man. We want peace. Let's find out the best way that we can do this. He was taken to the fort when he went to, and he was held prisoner. And remember, the two guys sitting at him by fireside were under the mandate of Connor. I think it was Colonel, or was it General Connor? Connor was one of the miners who was traveling with the California Volunteers. And they wanted to see General West. And so they had Mangus under lock and key, but they were sitting him by a fire to get warmth at night. They were heating their bayonets in the fire and touching them to his bare feet. And he finally stood up and said, "I am no child to be played with." And but his expostulations were cut short. They both aimed their rifles at him and shot him. And they emptied their pistols into his body. A soldier took his scalp, and another cut off his head and boiled the flesh away so that they could sell the skull to a phrenologist in the East. And they dumped the headless body in a ditch. And the official report stated that Mangus was killed while attempting to escape. Yet a witness saw it happen. It wasn't an attempted escape. He stood up to protest, having hot bayonets stuck to his feet. Now, after that, as Daniel Connor put it, the Indians went to war in earnest. They seemed bent on avenging the death of Magnus and all their power, with all their power. And so from the Chiricahua country of Arizona to the Mimbre Mountains of New Mexico, Cochise and his 300 warriors began a campaign to drive out the treacherous white men or sell their lives in the attempt. Now Victorio assembled another band, including the Mescaleros, who had escaped from the Bosque Redondo reservation. And they raided the settlements and the trails along the Rio Grande, from Giordano del Muerto to El Paso, and for 2 years these tiny armies of Apaches kept the Southwest in absolute turmoil. As I would have done if somebody was killing my people, murdering my leaders, and committing atrocities and stealing my land. Most of these Apache were armed only with bow and arrow. Their arrows were frail, thin-foot reeds. They were tri-feathered with triangular, inch-long quartz-head chip to fine points. And they held to their shafts by jagged notches instead of thongs or wrappings. These missiles had to be handled with great care, but when the heads reached their marks, they embedded with a tearing force of mini bullets. And with what they had, the Apache fought well, but they were outnumbered 100 to 1. And they could see nothing in the future but death or imprisonment. And this is where we left off last Friday. Now, after the Civil War's end and General Carleton's departure, the United States government made overtures of peace toward the Apache. In the moon of the big leaves, that's April 21st, 1865. We've gone step back a couple of years from 1869 and 1870, where we started this last week. Victorio and Nana met at Santeria with a representative from the United States. "I and my people want peace," Victorio said. "We are tired of war. We are poor. We have little for ourselves and our families to eat or wear. We want to make a peace, a lasting peace, one that will keep. I have washed my hands and mouth with cold, fresh water, and what I say is true." "You can trust us," Nana added in. And the agent's reply was brief. "I didn't come to ask you to make peace, but to tell you that you can have peace by going back to the reservation at the Bosque Redondo." They had heard much, and all of it bad, about the Bosque Redondo. Remember, this is the place where, in recent decades now, they've discovered uranium deposits, the largest in the United States, underneath the Bosque Redondo, which they've also tried to recede treaty rights for that, rather than let the Indians claim it. And this is why the water was brackish. People were getting sick there. It was not a healthy place to be, and it was on a dry piece of deserty land. "And I have no pockets to put what you say in," Nana commented dryly. "But the words have sunk deep into my heart. They will not be forgotten." Now, Victorio asked for a 2-day delay before starting to move his people to the Bosque Redondo reservation. He wanted to gather up all his people and their horses, and he promised to meet the agent again on April 23rd at Pinos Altos. So for 4 days, the agent waited at Pinos Altos, but not a single Apache appeared. Rather than go to the hated Bosque Redondo, they preferred to face hunger, privation, and even death. Some drifted southward into Mexico, others joined Cochise in the Dragoon Mountains. And after his experience at Apache Pass, and then the murder of Mangus, Cochise had not even responded to the overtures of peace. And during the next 5 years, the warrior Apaches generally stayed clear of American forts and settlements. Whenever a rancher or a miner grew careless, however, a band of raiders would swoop down to capture horses or cattle, and thus they carried on their guerrilla war. And by 1870, raids were growing more frequent, and because Cochise was the chief best known to the white man, he was usually held responsible for hostile actions no matter where or to whom they occurred. This was why in the spring of 1871, we're now back to the present that we had started back on Friday, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs so eagerly petitioned Cochise to visit Washington. Cochise, however, didn't believe that anything had changed at all in Washington, D.C. He still couldn't trust any representative of the United States government, especially after the murder, assassination, if you will, of Mangus, his father-in-law. And a few weeks later, and by the way, remember Mangus, when he approached the white military, he did it under a white flag of truce, and they still took him prisoner and they still murdered him. So a few weeks later, after what happened to Eskinminzin and the Aravaipas at Camp Grant, Cochise was even more positive that no Apache should ever again put his life in the hands of the treacherous Americans. Eskinminzin. I don't know if that's exactly how it's pronounced, but Eskiminzin and his little band of 150 followers lived along Aravaipa Creek, from which they took their name, the Aravaipa. And this was north of Cochise's stronghold between the San Pedro River and the Galero Mountains. Eskiminzin was a stocky, slightly bow-legged Apache with a handsome bulldog face, and he could be easygoing at times. He was fierce at other people. And one day in February of 1871, Eskiminzin walked into Camp Grant, a small post at the confluence of the Aravaipa Creek and the San Pedro. And he had heard that the capitán, Lieutenant Royal E. Whitman, was friendly, and he asked to see him. Eskiminzin told Whitman that his people no longer had a home and could make none because the bluecoats were always pursuing them and shooting at them for no reason other than that they were Apaches. And he wanted to make peace so they could settle down and plant crops along the Aravaipa. Now, Whitman asked Eskiminzin why he did not go to the White Mountains where the government had set aside a reservation. "That is not our country," the chief replied. "Neither are they our people. We're at peace with them, the Coyoteros, but never have mixed with them. Our fathers and our fathers before them have lived in these mountains and have raised corn in the valley. We are taught to make mescal, and our principal article of food, and in summer and winter here we have never failing supply. And at the White Mountains there is none, and without it now we get sick. Some of our people have been for a short time at the White Mountains, but they are not contented, and they all say, 'Let's go back to Aravaipa and make a final peace and never break it.'" Now, Lieutenant Whitman told Eskiminzin that he had no authority to make peace with his band, but that if they surrendered their firearms, he could permit them to stay near the fort as technical prisoners of war until he received instructions from his superior officers. Eskiminzin agreed to this. Okay, we'll do it. They're starving. They want to get back on their land. And the Aravaipa came in a few at a time to turn in their guns, some even disposing of their bows and arrows. They established a village a few miles up the creek. They planted corn. You already see it. They established a village up creek with no weapons. By the way, this is probably a good time to add in here. Why do you think there are so many people who support the Second Amendment? Why do you think the Second Amendment exists in our Constitution? You look back through recent history, you find any tyrant, any dictator that suppresses the people will first take away their weapons, so they have no means of defense. What's the Second Amendment state? It's not for squirrel hunting, folks. The Second Amendment was written to say that the citizenry of this country will always have a way to fight a tyrannical government by the free possession of weapons. So if you're against guns, go read up on that. You don't have to own a gun if you don't want to, but you cannot deny the rights of citizens of this country to own one. Okay, moving on from that. So they established this village a few miles up the creek. They planted corn. They began cooking mescal. And impressed by their industry, Whitman employed them to cut hay for the camp's cavalry horses so they could earn money to buy supplies. Neighboring ranchers also employed some of them as laborers. The experiment worked so well that by mid-March, more than 100 other Apaches, including some Pinaus, had joined Eskiminzin's people, and others were coming in almost daily. Let me take a sip of coffee, folks. All right. Whitman, meanwhile, had written an explanation of the situation to his military superiors. He requested instructions, but late in April, his inquiries was returned for resubmission on proper government forms. You didn't submit this with the proper form. That was even going on 150 years ago. So uneasy because he knew that all responsibility for actions of Eskiminzin's Apaches were his, the lieutenant kept a close watch on their movements. On April 10th, Apaches raided San Xavier, south of Tucson. They stole cattle and horses. And on April 13th, 4 Americans were killed in a raid near the San Pedro east of Tucson. And Tucson in 1871 was an oasis of 3,000 gamblers, saloon keepers, traders, freighters, miners, and a few contractors who had made fortunes during the Civil War and were hopeful of continuing their profits on an Indian war. This backwash of citizens had organized a committee of public safety to protect themselves from Apache. But as soon as none came near the town, the committee frequently saddled up and rode out in pursuit of raiders in the outlying communities. And after the 2 April raids, some members of the committee announced that the raiders had come from the Aravaipa village near Camp Grant, although Camp Grant was 55 miles away from the Aravaipa settlement. And it was unlikely that Aravaipa Apache would have traveled that far, 55 miles, to make a raid of cattle and horses. And the pronouncement was readily accepted by most of the Tucson citizens. And in general, they were opposed to agencies where Apaches worked for a living and were peaceful. Such conditions led to the reductions in military forces and a slackening of war prosperity for those who were settled in Tucson to make a living and make a killing, no pun intended, off of really instigating an Indian war. So during the last weeks of April, a veteran Indian fighter named William S. Oury, O-U-R-Y, began organizing an expedition to attack the unarmed Aravaipa near Camp Grant, 55 miles from Camp Grant. 6 Americans, 42 Mexicans agreed to participate, but Oury decided this was not enough to ensure success. From the Papago Indians, who years before had been subdued by Spanish soldiers and converted to Christianity by Spanish priests, he recruited 92 more mercenaries. And on April 28th, this formidable band of 140 well-armed men was ready to ride. And so the first warning that Lieutenant Whitman at Camp Grant had of the expedition was a message from the small military garrison at Tucson informing him that a large party had left there on the 28th with the avowed purpose of killing all the Indians near Camp Grant. Whitman received the dispatch from a mounted messenger at 7:30 a.m. on April 30th. I immediately sent the 2 interpreters mounted to the Indian camp, Whitman later reported, with orders to tell the chiefs the exact state of things and for them to bring their entire party inside the post. My messengers returned in about an hour with intelligence that they could find no living Indians. And this is documented, of course. I'm looking for my documentation here. I can't pull it up. So less than 3 hours before Whitman received the warning message, the Tucson expedition was deployed along the creek bluffs and the sandy approaches of the Aravaipa village. And this is Eskiminzin's village. And the men on the low ground opened fire on the wikiups, the dwellings that they built. And as the Apache ran into the open, rifle fire from the bluffs cut them all down. In half an hour, every single Apache in the camp had fled, been captured, or was dead. The captives were all children, 27 of them, taken by the Christianized Papagos to be the Christianized Papagatos to be sold into slavery in Mexico. Christianity is part of the slave trade here. When Whitman reached the village, it was still burning. The ground was strewn with dead and mutilated women and children. He said, I found quite a number of women shot while asleep beside their bundles of hay, which they had collected to bring in that morning. The wounded who were unable to get away had their brains beaten out with clubs or stones, while some were shot full of arrows. After having been mortally wounded by gunshot, the bodies were all stripped of clothing. Surgeon C.B. Breesley, who accompanied Lieutenant Whitman, reported that 2 of the women were, quote, lying in such a position, and from the appearance of their genital organs and of their wounds, there can be no doubt that they were first ravished, and then shot dead. One infant of some 10 months was shot twice, and one leg hacked nearly off. This is the report of Brealey, the surgeon of Whitman's. Whitman was concerned that the survivors who had fled into the mountains would blame him for failing to protect them. I thought the act of caring for their dead would be an evidence to them of our sympathy at least, and the conjecture proved correct, for while at the work many of them came to the spot and indulged in their expressions of grief, too wild and terrible to be described. Of the whole number burned, about 100, one was an old man and one was a well-grown boy. All the rest were women and children. That was Whitman's report. Death from wounds and the discovery of missing bodies eventually brought the total killed to 144. Eskiminzin did not return, and some of the Apaches believed he would go on the warpath in revenge for the massacre. Now, can you understand why Cochise did not want to go meet with the White Fathers in Washington? My women and children have been killed before my face, one of the men told Whitman, and I've been unable to defend them. Most Indians in my place would take a knife and cut his throat. But after the lieutenant pledged his word that he would not rest until they had justice, the grieving Aravaipa agreed to help rebuild the village and start life over again. Whitman's persistent efforts finally brought the Tucson killers to trial. The defense claimed that the citizens of Tucson had followed the trail of murdering Apaches straight to the Aravaipa village. Oscar Hutton, the post guide at Camp Grant, testified for the prosecution. I give it as my deliberate judgment that no raiding party was ever made up from the Indians at this post. F.L. Austin, the post trader, Miles L. Wood, the beef contractor, and William Ness, who carried the mail between Camp Grant and Tucson, all made similar statements. The trial lasted for 5 days. The jury deliberated for 19 minutes. The verdict was for the release of the Tucson killers. As for Lieutenant Whitman, his unpopular defense of the Apache destroyed his military career. He survived 3 court-martials on ridiculous charges, and after several more years of service without promotion, he resigned. This is what you got if you stood for what was right. The Camp Grant massacre, however, fixed the attention of Washington, D.C. upon the Apaches. President Grant described the attack as purely murder and ordered the Army and the Indian Bureau to take urgent actions to bring peace to the Southwest. In June of 1871, General George Crook arrived at Tucson, and he took command of the Department of Arizona. And a few weeks after Vincent Collier, a special representative of the Indian Bureau, arrived at Camp Grant. Both men were keenly interested in arranging a meeting with the leading Apache chiefs, especially Cochise. Now, Collier first met with Eskiminzin in hopes of persuading him to return to his peaceful ways. Eskinminzin came down out of the mountains and said he'd be glad to talk peace with Commissioner Collier. He said the commissioner probably thought he would see a great capitán, Eskinminzin remarked quietly, but he only sees a very poor man and not very much of a capitán. If the commissioner had seen me about 3 months ago, he would have seen me a capitán. Then I had many people, but many have been massacred. Now I have got a few people. Ever since I left this place, I have been nearby. I knew I had friends here, but I was afraid to come back. I never had much to say, but this I can say, I like this place. I have said all that I ought to say, since I have a few people anywhere to speak for. If it had not been for the massacre, there would have been a great many more people here now, but after that massacre, who could have stood it? When I made peace with Lieutenant Whitman, my heart was very big and happy. The people of Tucson and San Xavier must be crazy. They acted as though they had neither heads nor hearts. They must have a thirst for our blood. These Tucson people write for the papers and tell their own story. The Apaches have no one to tell their story. Collier promised to tell the Apache's story to the Great Father and to the white people who'd never heard of it. I think I must have been God. It must have been God who gave you a good heart to come and see us. Or you must have had a good father and a mother to make you so kind. This is what Eskinminzin said to Collier. It was God, Collier said. It was, Eskinminzin said, but the white men present could not tell in the translation whether he spoke in confirmation or was asking a question. The next chief on Collier's agenda was Delche of the Tonto Apache. Delche was a stocky, broad-shouldered man of about 35 years old. He wore a silver ornament in one of his ears. His facial expression was fierce. He usually moved at a half-trot, as though he were constantly in a hurry. And as early as 1868, Delche had agreed to keep the Tontos at peace and to use Camp McDowell on the west bank of the Rio Verde as his agency. Delche, however, found the Bluecoat soldiers to be exceedingly treacherous. On one occasion, an officer had fired buckshot into Delche's back for no reason the chief could fathom, and he was quite certain that the post surgeon had tried to poison him. And after these occurrences, Delche stayed absolutely clear of Camp McDowell, as you can only imagine. Commissioner Collier arrived at Camp McDowell late in September with authority to use soldiers to open communications with Delche. And although truce flags, smoke signals, night fires were used extensively by parties of cavalry and infantry, Delche would not respond until he had thoroughly tested the intentions of the Bluecoats. And by the time he agreed to meet with Captain W.N. Netterville in Sunflower Valley, October 31st of 1871, Commissioner Collier had returned to Washington to make his report. A copy of Delche's remarks was forwarded to Collier, and he said this: "I don't want to run over the mountains anymore," Delche said. "I want to make a big treaty. I will make a peace that will last. I will keep my word until the stones melt." He did not want to take the Tontos back to Camp McDowell, however. It was not a good place. After all, he'd been shot and poisoned there. The Tontos preferred to live in Sunflower Valley near the mountains, so they could gather the fruit and get the wild game there. "If the big capitán at Camp McDowell does not put a post where I stay," he insisted, "I can do nothing more. For God made the white man, and God made the Apache. And the Apache has just as much right to the country as the white man. I want to make a treaty that will last so that both can travel over the country and have no trouble. As soon as the treaty is made, I want a piece of paper so that I can travel over the country as a white man. I will put a rock down to show that when it melts, the treaty is to be broken. If I make a treaty, I expect the big capitán will come and see me whenever I send for him, and I will do the same whenever he sends for me. If a treaty is made and the big capitán does not keep his promises with me, I will put his word in a hole and cover it up with dirt. I promise that when a treaty is made, the white man or soldiers can turn out all their horses and mules without anyone to look after them, and if any are stolen by the Apaches, I will cut my own throat. I want to make a big treaty, and if the Americans break the treaty, I do not want any more trouble. The white man can take one road and I can take the other. Tell